All right, we are recording. So why don't we go ahead and get started then? Ed, I don't know if you had a chance to do any introductions. I can go ahead and go do that.
Yep,
Oh,
sounds
excuse
good.
me.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Carrie Leatherman, and I'm here presenting today with my colleague, Ed Eckel. I am a natural science, there's Ed. I'm the natural sciences librarian. Ed is our engineering librarian. Diana Sachs, our health sciences librarian, was on the information about the presentation today as presenting. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it today. We will be presenting, just the two of us. We'll make sure to give you Diana's contact information if you want to get in touch with her about any health sciences specific questions. Meanwhile, we're more than happy to try to field any questions you may have for us. All right. All right, so let's get going. So today's workshop, we are going to be talking about literature reviews in the sciences, in engineering, health sciences, and natural sciences. Our workshop today is going to include a couple of things. And let me give you our laundry list. We're going to be talking about what is a lit review, how to define the question and the scope that a lit review will address, and why it's helpful to actually define these ahead of time, where to search for this literature, what effective search techniques are to use when trying to find this literature, how to keep track of your searches, how to determine if the literature you found is actually relevant for the question you're trying to answer, and last but certainly not least, how do you know when your literature review is done? All right. Throughout the workshop, we're also going to be covering a few different hands-on activities. You have a chance to take what we've been discussing and actually give it a try, actually use it in real life. Also, at the end of our presentation today, we're going to put up a link for a survey, an online survey about the presentation today and getting your feedback. It's important to us that we get feedback from you all because we want to make sure that these sessions actually address your needs. And again, throughout this, you're more than welcome to ask questions. Ed, everything okay?
The feedback form will be sent by Juliana
Oh,
on Friday.
thank you.
So we don't have to have our so there'll be a feedback form for the whole week's
Oh,
workshops.
fabulous. Thank you so much, Ed. Yes, so
Mhm.
look for that in your inbox. And please, it's so easy to just kind of push those aside and not fill those out. We really encourage you to fill them out. We read them, and it really does help us determine whether what we're doing actually meets your needs. And that's the whole point of all this. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's progress to the next slide. All right. So, literature reviews. What is a literature review? I've got a definition up on the screen. I'll just kind of briefly read that. It's both a process and a product. Systematically searching for searching databases for the most current and relevant literature written about a research topic. It's also a product. The literature review is a written synthesis of what is known about a research topic and provides supporting evidence for a thesis. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Obviously, the idea of that a literature review is both a process. Somebody, for example, conducts a literature review, and a product. Once you have a literature review, you could literally take this literature review as a document and email it to somebody. So process and product. There's three reasons generally why people do a literature review. One of those is to use it as an introduction for a primary research article. So if you're writing a scholarly article about your research, generally you would include a literature review in it to give your readers some context for your research question and the research that you've actually done. Okay. A second reason is when you're trying to justify a proposal, like, for example, a master's thesis or a dissertation. You generally have a literature review to indicate that there's some gap in the scholarly knowledge about a particular topic, and then that thesis or dissertation will be filling in that gap. The third reason for a literature review is just people do it just to give a general overview of a topic. You gather up all the literature, present what's going on. There you go. So, what does it mean when you've done a literature review? Generally, people do about three things when they do that. One, they've gone ahead and searched the scholarly literature about a specific topic in some sort of comprehensive way. You've tried to find all, and there should be big air quotes around all, all of the scholarly articles that address your particular research question. And again, you're trying to cover all this literature so you have the larger context for whatever it is you're doing that relates to literature review, whether it's your thesis or dissertation, a primary research article, what have you. You want that context, and that you can only have that if you've covered all the literature that exists. Also, another thing that happens when a person does a literature review is they've looked at the literature and decided whether it really is relevant to their research question or topic. You might find literature related to what you're interested in, but doesn't really quite touch on it. So there's this decision-making process of whether you do or don't include it. Also, a literature review is also going to include a summarized, a summary of the trends in the literature that they've found. If you're doing a study on whether coffee causes high blood pressure, you're going to describe the different trends of whether it does, doesn't, or it's somewhere in between in your literature review. All right. A couple of things about what a literature review is not. A literature review is not a systematic review. Okay. It's not a systematic review. I know in our definition there was the word systematically, but the phrase systematic review has a very specific meaning. It's a systematic review involves a very specific, defined process in which literature is reviewed and then is only included in a systematic review if it meets very specific criteria about the acceptable level of research quality. Okay. Systematic reviews are often done in health and medical sciences, although a few other disciplines do it as well, but it's a very specific concept. Literature review is different than a systematic review. Can't state that enough. Another thing a literature review is not is an annotated bibliography. That's something a little different too. An annotated bibliography is simply a list of resources. Doesn't necessarily have to be comprehensive, but with every citation, it includes some sort of brief summary or analysis of the particular source. Okay, that's the annotated part. Our workshop today is not going to cover systematic reviews or annotated bibliographies. Just want to let you know about that. A couple of things today about what we're covering today. We're going to be assuming that most of you all are probably working on a lit review for your thesis or dissertation, some kind of really large scale project like that with an intensive literature review. Having said that, a lot of what we're talking about, all the techniques, still applies to people doing a little bit smaller scale projects. Like if you have a term paper for this semester that requires a literature review, the stuff we do today, you can still do it for that. It just isn't as large a scale of a project. Okay. All right. So having said that, literature reviews. So what do we do here? When you're actually doing a literature review, you want to start off by defining your research question. Okay. What question is your research trying to answer? Both, for example, in your master's or thesis, what your general research question is trying to answer, and also how does that question play out in the literature review then? Again, the literature review is trying to give context to your broader research question. And I just want to point out that if you try to do a literature review with at least not having some basic research question in your head, it's kind of like trying to plan a road trip without a destination in mind. You could get in the car and start driving, but it's going to be a little bit aimless and you won't know when you reach your destination. So it's really important to have that research question, at least a tentative one, in mind when you're doing a literature review. All right. So define that. A few other questions you want to think about when doing a lit review. Think about, for the literature you're finding, think about what kind of methodology those primary research sources are going to have. Are you interested in qualitative or quantitative research? If you're studying living things, for example, what is your study population? Is there a particular organism of interest that you'll be studying? If you're specifically studying humans, Are there certain demographic groups that you want to include? Do you want, for example, children or only middle-aged people or the elderly or any other kind of variation on that? If you're not studying living things, if you're doing something in engineering or the material sciences, what sort of specific materials are you interested in? Is it a specific alloy or compound or chemical? What is it that you're really trying to focus on? Okay. Another thing to think about is the scope of your literature review. And some criteria to think about are, for example, what is the date range of the literature you're interested in? Are you interested only in very recent studies, perhaps in the past 5 years? Are you interested in some specific time period in the past? Are you looking more broadly? You're probably going to have some kind of date range in mind. What are the subject areas you want to include? Are there inclusion or exclusion criteria? Do you want to focus on particular document types? And by that I mean, are you interested in primary research articles, theses and dissertations, conference proceedings, government reports? How broad do you want to get? And with all of these questions, especially document types or any other scope parameter, if you're not sure, and if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, it's really helpful to talk to like a course instructor or your advisor. They can give you some great insights on how narrow or broad you should be getting with these different types of parameters. Okay, so having said that, let's do this. Let's actually think about how to apply some of these ideas and do an activity, all right? I am going to, and I don't know if you did actually, Ed, put in the chat. Oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to.
I just pasted it in the chat box.
Thank
They're
you.
all set.
If you guys could click on that link, it's going to take you to a Google Doc, and it's going to be a spreadsheet. What you guys can do is go ahead and take a look at columns A through C. Go ahead and actually, I'm going to do this too. I'll share that with you. Go ahead. Oh, let me see if I can pull this up. Go ahead and open it up and start thinking about what your research question is. What are some of the other things that you want to be covering? And go ahead and put them in, here we go, put them in this spreadsheet. Can you guys see my spreadsheet okay? Did that pop up? Excellent, thank you. So plop in your name or a pseudonym if you want to be a little bit more private. Put in a tentative research question and think about some of the scope criteria we just talked about.
I posted the link in the chat again for you folks.
Thank you.
The example in yellow at the top gives you a sense of what we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I want to point out too, we'll only take a couple of minutes. Let's do literally like 2 minutes. This shouldn't be high pressure for you guys. We're not going to check up on you once you've done your thesis and dissertation and insist that it was on the topic you put in the spreadsheet. This is just brainstorming, just to give it a try. We will use your research topic and scope criteria in the next 2 activities just to kind of build upon these, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and go back to that just so you guys don't feel self-conscious.
You don't have to worry about the database column. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, no worries, guys. Yeah. And again, you can put anything you want in there. If you can't think of anything, it's okay. Start with just a simple term. You can always build upon it. It's a chance to kind of get the ideas flowing and just a chance to try out some of these ideas. All right, let's see how we're doing here. Whoops. Okay. Let's just take a few more seconds and we'll go ahead then. Okay, why don't we do this? If you're finishing up, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll go ahead and move on to our other slides though. Okay. So we just did a little searching, or not searching, a little thinking about research question, scope. Let's talk about where you actually go then to start finding this literature that you're going to be reviewing. Okay, so where do you search? All right, so most academic and scholarly research, the stuff that you guys are probably going to be interested in, especially if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, is the kind of information that's mainly only available through subscription journals, okay? Peer-reviewed journals in which scholarly research is published. Now, the catch, though, is a lot of those types of journals are, again, available through subscriptions, which cost money. All right, and you guys are students, and by no means should you have to pay for subscriptions or articles or anything like that. So the library actually subscribes to article databases that include runs of these scholarly journals, okay? That's probably one of the best places to start searching for this type of literature, and for a couple of reasons. One, the majority of articles, peer-reviewed articles, are only available this way. There is a movement for open access publishing, but the percentage is very small of the overall literature that exists. Okay, much greater amount of it is in paid sources, subscription sources, than free sources. Okay, that includes Google Scholar too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So having said that, databases are the way to go. There are two types of databases, discipline-specific and interdisciplinary. There's pros and cons to each of these types. Sometimes it pays to look in both types. Here are some examples of some discipline-specific databases. Engineering Village, PsycInfo for psychology, PubMed has a lot of medical information, especially biomedical information. SciFinder Scholar has a lot of chemistry-related information. Interdisciplinary databases, Scopus, whole series of ProQuest databases. Library Search, which isn't specifically an article database, but a search tool through the library website that helps you search within a lot of other article databases as well as our holdings. Google Scholar, that again, it's not specifically an article database, it's more of an internet search tool. And as comprehensive as its search results can be, you know, you can type in a word and get millions of hits. It doesn't have, how do I put this? It doesn't have as comprehensive coverage of many journals as you would think it would. You can find a lot of stuff, but oftentimes it's a little patchy as far as coverage of a particular journal or a particular topic. Even Google themselves on their information page in Google Scholar specifically states that they aren't able to reach, Google Scholar, any pages that our search robots or the majority of web users are not able to access. If there's a paywall, if you have to sign up for an account, they can't access that. And by definition, that includes a lot of the scholarly journals. All right. So article databases are the way to go. So having said that, let's do an activity. We're going to use that spreadsheet again. But what I want to do is have you guys actually look at some of the databases we have available through the library website. So I'm going to go to the library website. Let me pull up the library website, and it's www.wmich.edu/library. And here's our library main page. What I'm going to do is scroll down a bit, and I'm going to use some visual terms to describe what I'm doing. If you would like it kind of described in some alternative terms, please let me know. Unfortunately, I'm very biased. I'm looking at what I'm doing. I can make things available to you otherwise, though, if you would like. But I'm going to look at a horizontal gold bar here. On the left-hand side, there's a pancake stack icon with the term databases. Click on that. And this takes you to a couple of different things. It shows you an A through Z list of all of our databases. And there's a lot of them, over 500 databases. You can look these up by, obviously their name of the database. There's also a subjects drop-down menu. When you click, it shows you all the subjects. And you can look up databases by subject. I'm going to click on biological sciences just for an example. Oops, let me get my mouse back here. And if I scroll down here, here are all the databases with some aspect of biological sciences included in their contents. You can also see that all these databases have a nice little summary of their subject range that they cover, sometimes date coverage too. Good way to kind of triage and see if a particular database meets the criteria that you're looking for that we just talked about in our scope aspect of a lit review. Okay, so let's do this. Everyone, please go ahead and take a look at the databases related to the subject area of your research question that you put into the spreadsheet. Go ahead and select maybe 3 databases. They could be discipline specific. They can be interdisciplinary if you'd like to try those too. But take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and find 3 that look like they might be of interest, and then go ahead and put those names in, I believe it's column D through F in the spreadsheet. Okay, 5 minutes. By my clock, that'll be 1:33. Once everyone's done that, we'll go ahead and start back up again. All right, and meanwhile, if you have any questions, please put it in chat, unmute yourself, and just go ahead and say what your question is. We want to make sure that this is understandable stuff for you guys. And no worries, you don't need to do the terms quite yet. If you've got some in there, no problem. We'll be talking more about search terms in a few minutes. Okay. All right. I think we're about at 5 minutes. Would anybody like a few more minutes just to finish up?
There's a question in the
Oh,
chat. I'm a little lost as to what we're searching for.
ah,
So Gavin, what you're doing right here, right now was just trying to find potential databases that would be relevant places to search for your research topic area. So if you're doing the genocide, Uyghur genocide, trying to find a database that would be relevant for
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. A lot of times, too, you'll want to consider a database that's related to the department you may be working out of if you're doing a thesis and dissertation. Sometimes a topic can be very multidisciplinary, though, but you want to always think about who am I writing this for? And if it's for a master's degree in biological sciences, you might want to think at least about using a database related to that. Perhaps other ones too, though, depending on your topic. Okay. Okay. Would like a few more minutes just to kind of finish that up? Are you doing okay?
I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
share my screen
Awesome.
so that when we're ready, we'll move on to
Okay.
that.
Okay. Thanks, Ed.
Uh-huh.
I tell you what, I don't see any questions. Why don't we go ahead and just we'll move along. Feel free to keep kind of typing away as we do the rest of the presentation. We'll get you caught up. Okay. All right. Thanks. Take it away, Ed.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my slides. We're on slide 11, search terms or keywords. So we talked about potential databases where you might be searching for your information. Now, the next step when you're preparing a literature review is figuring out what you're going to search for. And that may be simple, sometimes it is, but since the purpose of a literature review is to be comprehensive, you often have to think creatively about what terms you're going to search for in order to be certain you aren't missing some important or relevant information. You can think of keywords, as librarians call them, or search terms, as kind of like hashtags in social media. If you're looking for a social media post on a particular term and you use one hashtag, but an author of a post has not used that hashtag, that post is not going to come up in your search. So it's important to think about the terminology you're using for your searches. Now, one of the simplest ways of getting search terms or keywords is to start with what you already have. So you may have a textbook for a class, or you may already have an article that you found. This could be a good place to look for the words that the authors are using to describe your topic. And these would be the words that you would then use in Google or in a database to find articles. You could also look at what are called thesauri or thesauruses, specialized thesauruses. So instead of a general thesaurus that has a list of terms, you would be looking at more specialized ones like the PubMed database, the biggest medical database in the world, has a list of subject headings that are called mesh subject headings that you might use to look at to find the relevant terms that you would search in that database. If you're in engineering, Engineering Village has a thesaurus of standardized engineering terminology that you would use to find relevant terms. The Association for Computing Machinery, or ACM, which is the big computer science professional association, has its own classification system with search terms. Looking at these would give you a sense of how experts in that field would talk about that topic. You could also do a quick search of Google Scholar and take a look at the search titles of the articles that come up and see what terms are used in the titles of those articles. The important thing is you need to make a list of keywords and search terms. So you need to brainstorm all the most relevant and important words that would describe your topic that you could then use as you are searching. And you're going to keep adding to this list as you read and continue your literature review, because terms will come up as you're reading articles and books that you wouldn't have thought of at the top of your head. So keep that list in a Word document, in a spreadsheet, or in a notebook. Okay.
And Ed, we have a couple questions in the chat. Would you like to address
Okay.
those or shall I?
Let me open the chat up here when I
Okay.
shared. Let's
I can.
see. Subject database exhausted of all. Well, I'm going to be talking about that later in the session about how to know that you searched everywhere. So hold off on that. Every database is different. So the databases that Carrie mentioned earlier, the interdisciplinary ones could be pretty exhaustive, but the discipline specific ones will focus just on that discipline. PubMed is probably as exhaustive as you can get with medicine. Engineering Village is very exhaustive, but you may need to look at several different databases to make sure you are not missing things. Now, as far as the subject thesauruses that Christina mentioned, yes, these are usually on the websites for the databases. So on my screen, I have the PsycInfo database up. I'm going to be talking about that in a little bit. And when I go here, I'm going to turn on my little annotate feature. There is a link here at the top of PsycInfo to the thesaurus. All right. And in Engineering Village, it's very similar. So if I click into the thesaurus, it's going to open the thesaurus up on my screen. We'll give it a moment here. And I can basically browse it for the different search terms that they use. These are basically like subject headings: head injuries, head banging, hazardous materials. This is the APA Thesaurus of Psychological Index Terms. If you don't know what a particular subject thesaurus is for your research area, check with a librarian because we can help you find that stuff. Okay? All right. Now, on my screen, in my slide, you're going to see a page from a journal article. A lot of databases allow you to search by subject headings or search terms. And many journal articles, when an author has to submit the article for review, the article will, the database or the publisher will ask the author to supply keywords that people might use to search on their topic. So if you look at this, this is a page of a journal article. And right on the first page of the journal article, there is a list of author-supplied keywords. All right. So as you are reading, if you find one relevant article, check that article to see if there are keywords in the article itself that you haven't thought of, and make sure to add those to your search list or your keyword list. Okay. So like I said, you're going to want to make a discipline of collecting these keywords. Turn that off. So now we're going to go back to the activities sheet from earlier. All right, let me pull that link up in the chat again. And what I would like you to do is go to, I believe it is column G. All right, so in your worksheet, the Google Sheet, go to column G, and in the column for your row, add in 4 or 5 keywords off the top of your head right now. We're not asking you to do any kind of major search yet. Just off the top of your head, 4 or 5 keywords that you think you might search on to find relevant articles on your topic. Okay, and just paste them in that. Take 2 minutes. Very short exercise. I see people are doing a great job. Great job with keywords. Keep in mind synonyms for your terms. So I see someone had physical activity, exercise, fitness. So words that mean the same or a similar idea but are not the same word, include those because you want to search all variations on the term that are relevant for your topic. Take one more minute. You don't have to think too hard about this right now. For the person doing the Uyghur genocide, keep in mind the term Uyghur and all variations of that term. So, you know, if you're studying a particular group of people, a specific ethnic group, the name of that ethnic group is definitely going to be one of your search terms. But by all means, you're going to want to also search a little more broadly as well.
I hope you don't mind if I jump into Ed. If you're
Mhm.
searching a particular animal, plant, or other species, considering the common name as well as the scientific classification name too, that might be helpful as well.
I'm going to give you one more minute. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. All right, let's move on. So now the next thing to think about, so we talked about keywords. Now I want to discuss some search techniques that you can use in any database. So I'm going to show you an example of the techniques shown on this slide in two different databases, an interdisciplinary database called Scopus, and then a disciplinary database called PsycInfo, the main psychology database. So the first thing is that you'll want to get used to using what's called Boolean logic in your searches, the use of the word and, or, and not, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. You'll want to get used to using date limits. Pretty much every database allows you to filter your search results by date, when the item, the book, or the journal article was published. Okay, so and you have to decide how far back you want to search, and this is something Carrie mentioned at the very beginning. And then finally, put in quotation marks around phrases to search for things as a concept or a unit. So let me open up. I've got two different databases here. I've got PsycInfo, all right, which is a ProQuest database. I'm going to increase the size of that a little bit so you can see my screen better. And I'm also going to open up Scopus, which is a interdisciplinary database. Now, most databases will give you search boxes where you can put your search terms in, okay? And these boxes will usually be linked with the word and, or, and not. So you'll notice that in PsycInfo, and, or, and not show up here. And also in Scopus, and, or, and Scopus calls it and not, but basically this is and, or, and not. And most databases have them in this kind of order. So by using the word and between the two terms on my screen right now, so my term cognitive behavior and the term depression, I'm telling this database I want this term to show up somewhere in the reference for the article, and at the same time, I also want this one. So I want both of these terms to show up. If I were to do this in Scopus, like I have an example here, cell carcinoma in the first box, and I also want the term liver to show up somewhere in the reference for the article, and I want the term zebrafish. Okay, so I've got three different terms, all three need to show up. I can change this drop down to or, and that radically changes this search. So now I'm saying I want all articles that include this phrase cognitive behavior, or that include depression. All right, so I don't need to have both. I can have one or the other. Okay, so this is going to make my results list a lot larger. Now, let's say I wanted to study cognitive behavior therapy, but I did not want anything that talked about depression. Then I would check this box off. Cognitive behavior, but not depression. Okay, and for example, going into the Scopus database, I want articles that talk about cell carcinoma and that mention liver, but I do not want the term zebrafish in any of the articles that show up. So I'm telling the database to change that to and not. So I want nothing relating to zebrafish. Okay. Now, as far as date limits, All right, in the Scopus database, the PsycInfo database, you'll see a publication date option down below. So I can limit to very recent materials, last 7 days, last 30 days, last 12 months, or a specific date range. So I could put in, I only want articles from 1995 to 2021, or maybe only articles from 1995 to 2010. Okay. Same thing with Scopus. Scopus gives me the option of adding a date range. And so again, I could pick a year, right? I could be go back just 21 years, or specific date range, 2000 to 2018. Okay, so pretty much every database is going to have date limit options. Now, the last thing is the idea of the putting quotation marks around a concept. So when you search in a database, if you leave terms in next to each other, but without quotation marks around them, the database is going to search for them as two separate words, cell and carcinoma. So cell might be in one part of the article reference and carcinoma might be in the other. Same thing for cognitive behavior, all right, in PsycInfo. If I take the quotation marks out, it's going to search for these as two separate words. But often, if you've got a phrase, it's a concept, you want that concept. You don't want it to search for the separate words. So you want to put it in quotation marks. Somebody mentioned including a questionnaire or data collecting instrument. For that, there's a couple different ways of doing that. You may, in a database, there may be, in the PsycInfo database, there's a methodology section. And on the right-hand side here in PsycInfo, there's a supplemental data section. So this database allows you to at least specify the type of methodology used. Okay, so if you're doing follow-up study, field study, I don't see anything with survey. Okay. Usually if you want a questionnaire or data collection instrument, you're probably going to want to include that as a keyword. So if I were studying cognitive behavior and depression, I might put in and survey, questionnaire, okay? And then I would search for either the abstract or I would even search for the full text if I could, okay? All right. So we're going to move on because we're running out of time here. So let me go to my next slide. Okay. So, and I would suggest that you talk to your librarian, and we'll talk about that soon if you want with the more in-depth questions that you have. So you need to track your searches and keep careful record of what databases you have searched in, what keywords you have searched, okay? What limits or filters that you used. So what date ranges did you search in which database and which keywords, and how many results you got, all right? So that you know what you've done. So in a month, you can go back and you've seen what you've done so you don't waste your effort, all right? All databases will allow you to capture your references or download them. These can usually be exported as an Excel file, a CSV file, which is a comma separated file, or in something called RIS format, which you use with bibliographic citation software. And speaking of bibliographic citation software, there are 4 main bibliographic softwares out on the market. There are 2 free ones. One is called Mendeley and the other is called Zotero. Both of those are free. They have nothing to do with Western. However, we do provide workshops on how to use Mendeley and Zotero, and I teach those. There is if you want to pay for software, EndNote is a paid software that usually I think costs $200 or $300. Paperpile is a bibliographic citation software that works with Google Docs. That is one that you have to pay for. It costs about $3 a month for a subscription. But if you are going to be doing a dissertation or thesis or an honors thesis, you really want to get used to using bibliographic citation software to store and organize your references and to create bibliographies. Now, beyond just searching for sources, once you find references from a database, you need to think about what is relevant, okay? What articles are valuable for you to read and what articles will not be. You're going to need to think about what inclusionary and exclusionary criteria you're going to use to decide what is worth reading. What study population is the article discussing? What is the date of publication? What is the type of publication? Are you looking at books too, or are you only considering peer-reviewed journal articles? Are you going to include conference papers in your literature review? What kind of study is the research on? Are you looking at only qualitative studies, or are you looking at quantitative studies or case studies? You may consider only certain methodologies or only certain types of research results. And finally, you might want to think about the rank of the journals that you are using. So you might consider only journals of the highest rank. So you might look at something like the impact factor or the SCImago rank. Okay, I'm going to paste that word SCImago in the chat box just so you know what I'm talking about. So SCImago is a ranking of journals based on how frequently their works get cited that is used by the Scopus database. Now, let me pull a scholarly journal up on my screen. So you may find some famous papers and then use the reference lists from those papers to find additional related articles. You might look for papers by well-known researchers. All right. This article I'm showing you on my computer screen has a reference list, and it is full of articles. So sometimes if you find one relevant article, you're gonna want to check the reference list to see if there are references there that you didn't find in the database. A seed paper is basically just an important or relevant paper that leads you out to other papers, either through the reference list or in terms of papers that cite that paper. And then finally, you can also look at papers that have cited the papers you've found. So the Scopus database and Google Scholar will tell you who has cited a particular paper, and you can use that to kind of link out to those papers. All right. We used to have a database called Web of Science, but we no longer do. So, but we do have Scopus, and you have access to Google Scholar. So we're going to give you a moment to do some search practice. All right. I think we only have 5 more minutes, Carrie. What do you think? 6 minutes. I can't hear you. You're muted.
I think you're right, Ed.
So should we hold off then on searching? Because we've only got 5 minutes.
Why don't we cover the rest and people can search afterwards or independently and just get back to us?
Okay, that sounds good. Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody asked earlier, kind of like, are the databases exhaustive of all necessary data, or would you might need to look at other sources? So there's no one answer to that question. It depends on your topic. It depends on which databases cover that topic. There is no database that is completely exhaustive and that covers everything, not even Google Scholar. We recommend talking with the librarian in your disciplinary area to figure out which databases cover most of the articles for your topic. Databases often overlap. So one database will have some of the same references as another in that discipline, but there may be references they don't have in common. So you might need to search 3 or 4 different databases, collect all the references, get rid of the duplicates, and then look at that list. There is something called the law of diminishing returns. You will start to know if you've basically done as exhaustive a search as you can, if you've come up with all of the possible keywords that you can, and you keep seeing the same references come up in your searches in multiple databases. At that point, you could start to say, okay, I'm seeing the same references. I either need to change my keywords in some way if I'm missing something, or I think I've probably found everything that's relevant. The last thing that you can do, remember articles are always being added to databases, even as we speak. So if I do a search in a database today, a month from now, there may be some more articles that have appeared in that database on my topic. So you can set up in most databases a citation alert that basically it runs the search for you and tells you if any new references have been added based on the keywords that you are searching on. So usually if you create an account in a database, it will enable you to save a search and then run the search for you at periodic times to collect more recent articles. Because you want to make sure during the portion of time that you're writing your dissertation or your thesis that an article that's relevant hasn't already been published. You want to make sure you capture all of those more recent articles. So we've only got a couple more minutes, so I want to paste some information into the chat box. Harry and I are science librarians, so I've pasted in the chat box my contact information, Carrie's contact information. She is our natural sciences librarian, and the contact information for Diana Sachs, who's our health sciences librarian. We can find additional contact names for you if you're outside these fields. All right. So feel free to contact us for help or questions based on what we've talked about today, or if you need help with getting your literature review set up. And if you are in areas other than the sciences, let us know and we can tell you who the librarian is for that area. In fact, let me go to the library page and I'm going to paste into the box here. Does that help? Connect with a librarian. Here it is. So here is the list of librarians by department. So I would check that list out to see who the librarian is for your area and contact that person for help in helping you scope out and set up a literature review. Okay? And please let us know if you have questions.
Yeah, if anybody wants to stay an extra few minutes and try some of those searches, I can stick around. I can't speak for Ed, but I'd be happy to stay.
I've got a consultation coming in soon.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes. By no means obligated to, though.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for putting on the whole week. I can't make them all, but really appreciate you guys taking the time.
You're welcome. And many of these will be actually recorded and then put up on the UWM Libraries YouTube channel. So if you Google WMU Libraries in YouTube, you'll come to that. They should be up sometime next week. Okay, just to let you know.
Sounds good. We appreciate you guys.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stop recording, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, you're welcome.